People who didn't have their own opinions before are now looking at pictures of dead civilians from one side of the conflict and blaming the other side, then vice versa. They see photos of bloodied Palestinian civilians and think that Israel is the bad guy. Then they learn that it was Israel's response after Hamas attacked an Israeli music festival. Now, they think Palestine is the bad guy. After hearing the Palestinians' explanation that Israel took their lands, they again see Israel as the bad guy. So, who is the bad guy, if there even is one? My name is Mr. Say It, and let's dig out some facts. A photo of blooding civilians influence our emotions and perceptions. Until we see the bigger picture, we cannot fully understand the conflict. It's crucial to establish clear milestones. I will manipulate you with emotional images or torture with comparisons between Islam and Judaism. The history of the Jews and Judaism in the land of Israel can be traced back to around 2000 BC, the establishment of royal authority among the Jews and the emergence of the Israelite and later Judean kingdoms began in the 10th century BC. Around 1200 BC, the Philistines settled along the coast, from which the modern name Palestine goes back. The term Philistia translates roughly to invaders or foreigners. The Israelites and the Philistines frequently fought with each other. The Philistines as a nation disappeared after the campaigns of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BC. In 135 AD, the Roman Emperor Hadrian suppressed the Jewish uprising against Rome and ordered the entire territory between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River to be called Palestine, Syria. The renaming was done to erase the memory of the Kingdom of Judah. After the revolt, Jews were largely expelled from the territory that is now known as Israel. Between 636 and 640, Byzantine Palestine was conquered by the Arabs. From that time, the Arab conquerors called the land Philastin, an Arabic adaptation of the name Palestine. Muslims became the majority by the 11th century. Although Jews and Christians were in the minority, they continued to live there throughout this period and never vanished. Different empires that controlled the land replaced one another over time. The process of Islamization began in the 7th century and continued until the end of the Ottoman Empire. From 1516 to 1918, the land was under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. 4 centuries under Muslim Turks significantly influenced the region. Muslim Arabs migrated from the Arabian Peninsula, increasing the overall population. Between the 7th and 20th centuries, Arabs generally held a more favorable position for much of the time, while Jews experienced minority status, along with its associated challenges and restrictions. The term Palestinian was commonly used to refer to the region, not a specific ethnicity. The core of the Israel-Palestinian conflict isn't new to humans. Two nations want the same land. The Jewish people trace their ancestral and cultural roots back to the 2nd millennium BC. Deep historical roots in the region suggest that Israelis and some Palestinians may have some ancestral connection to the ancient Canaanites. While Arabs have lived here for a very long time, the modern ethno-national Palestinian identity emerged in the 20th century. More precisely, Palestinian self-identity was notably amplified and presented in the 1960s. People lived there for centuries without this specific self-identity. To them, it's their homeland, and that's correct. I'm not going to calculate who was the first, as they've lived there for centuries upon centuries. I'm not going to involve here religious artifacts like Tanakh and Qur'an. Let's see how they tried to find a solution. The name Palestine became widely known after the British Empire received a mandate for Palestine from the League of Nations in 1920. The truly acute phase of the violent conflict began during the time of mandatory Palestine. Jerusalem and Palestine are the only places in the world that Jews can call home. Arabs didn't like that Jews were coming more and more, and Jews didn't like that Arabs didn't like that. The violence produced more violence. From that time and up to now, we have had mutual accusations of the execution of prisoners of war and civilians, destroying villages, and forced eviction. Finding ways to stop it, the British established the Peel Commission to investigate the causes of unrest in 1936. Unsurprisingly, the cause was Arabs and Jews' desire to govern the same land. The result of the commission was a two-state solution, where Arabs get 80% of the land and the other 20% go to Jews. Jews accepted it, but Arabs didn't. Can you believe Arabs didn't want Jews to have their own state so hard, so they rejected the 80-20 option. Violent rebellion was resumed. If Arabs had accepted that offer, it's possible that 6 million Jews might not have been killed by Nazi Germans and their allies. Just think about it, 6 million people could be alive. Interestingly, the British didn't differentiate between the Palestinians and Jews in the region. They used the terms Jews and Arabs. Also, 1936 to 1939 Arab Revolt is called Arab. The name the Great Palestinian Revolt appeared after and became popular in the 1970s. In 1947, the British weren't able to resolve the conflict and asked the United Nations to find a solution. As a result, we have United Nations Resolution 181, a resolution that called for the partition of Palestine into Arab and Jewish states. The Arabs rejected the plan and started the war that was called the First Arab-Israeli War. On May 14, 1948, Israel declared its independence. Immediately, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Transjordan, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Yemen sent regular troops to Israel and lost the war afterward. There was a 6-day war between Israel on the one hand and Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Algeria on the other in 1967. Israel won the war and took the territory 3.5 times more than its size before the war, but later returned to trading for peace. On September 1, 1967, in Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, the Arab League Summit signed a resolution of 3 no's: no peace with Israel, no negotiation with Israel, no recognition of Israel. Though Israel didn't make a direct two-state solution proposal, there was a logic in Resolution 242 passed by the United Nations Security Council in November 1967. Termination of all claims or states of belligerency, live in peace within secure and recognized boundaries free from threats or acts of force. Israel had a willingness to trade land for peace. Again, it's not directly about the Palestinian state, but about Arab neighboring countries, regional peace, and border recognition. Arabs chose to keep the principles of 3 no's. The Oslo Accords, signed in the 1990s, set the framework for a potential two-state solution. There were several attempts at peace, including the 2000 Camp David Summit, 2001 Taba Summit, and 2008 Annapolis Conference. Although the atmosphere was much better than 3 no's era, 2-state offers were declined or left with no response. It's important to say that Palestinian Arabs to some degree walk some path from not recognizing Israel's right to exist to participating in conversation, which probably implies the possibility of a two-state solution. But there was nothing further. Israelis repeatedly offered a two-state solution, and Palestinians rejected it repeatedly, often with violence as a way of response. While some Israelis saw one state with 2 nations inside living in peace and mutual respect, others saw 2 independent countries living in peace and mutual respect. The majority of Palestinians saw one state only, with no Jews there. I hope this brief history introduction has helped you to understand a lot about the Israel-Palestine conflict. Talking about the conflict, it's hard not to mention Hamas. Founded in 1987, Hamas is a Palestinian political and militant group that stands in opposition to the existence of Israel. The United States, Canada, the European Union, and other nations designate Hamas as a terrorist organization. In 1988, the Islamic Resistance Movement presented the Hamas Charter. Feel free to check it online. The second paragraph of Hamas Covenant is, Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. Article 1. The movement's program is Islam. Article 13. Initiatives and so-called peaceful solutions and international conferences are in contradiction to the principles of the Islamic resistance movement. There is no solution for the Palestinian question except through jihad. People in America and Europe didn't know that. But wait, probably terrorist organization Hamas seized power there. Maybe free Palestine from Hamas. Actually, Hamas won the election in the Gaza Strip in 2006. International observers witnessed elections were largely free and fair. The majority of Palestinians voted for Hamas. Somebody could say that there were no elections after 2006 and voters might have changed their minds after seeing what Hamas is doing. The reality is the opposite. Hamas is still supported by the majority of Palestinians. According to the Washington Institute, the majority of Palestinians want to have Palestine state from the river to the sea, which means no Jews. Here we have Gazans' responses. 56% want one Palestine with no Jews, 31% agree to a two-state solution, and only 9% see one state for Jews and Arabs with equal rights as their personal opinion. West Bank, rapid growth from 30% to 66% for one Palestine with no Jews in 4 years, and within these 4 years rapid decrease from 44% to 14% for a two-state solution. By the way, Hamas receives support not only from the hearts of Palestinians. Iran reportedly supplies $100 million in financial and military support annually. Qatar reportedly contributed more than $150 million to Hamas in 2019, $100 million in 2020, and $360 million in 2021. Qatar now funds Hamas with an estimated $120 million per year. Turkey, Malaysia, Algeria, and Kuwait also provide financial, military, diplomatic, and political support to Hamas. Iran is a significant player in the region. Over the last 4 decades, the Iranian regime has built a network of armed groups on Israel's borders. At least 19 terrorist organizations receive funding, training, and weapons from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Once again, 19. Hamas is supported not only by Palestinians, not only by some other countries' policymakers, but by civilians too. As an example, thousands in the capital of Jordan chanting in support of Hamas. Israel is usually blamed for being an apartheid state. 2 million Arabs live in Israel, constituting 21% of the total population. They have the same legal rights as Jews. They use the same education and health care system. They vote and work in Knesset, the Israeli parliament. There are Arab parties in Israel. The BLM of Chicago doesn't know what apartheid is and devalues the hardship that people endured in South Africa in the past. Some references for BLM. Frederick Willem de Klerk, Nobel Peace Prize laureate, President of South Africa in 1989 to 1994, under whose leadership laws on racial segregation were abolished, expressed an unambiguous position that Israel is not a country of apartheid. Kenneth Meshew, member of the South African Parliament. Apartheid was very painful. Anyone who claims that Israel is an apartheid state is actually minimizing this phenomenon, which simply does not exist in Israel. I was born in South Africa 59 years ago, and I survived apartheid. I can assure you that Israel is not an apartheid state. There are 2 million Arabs living in Israel, a country governed by Israelis, including both Jews and Arabs. Do TikTok videos refer accusations of apartheid to the Gaza Strip and West Bank? There is no Jews in Gaza Strip today. There is no Jews in the areas of West Bank that are governed by the Palestinian Authority. 60% of the West Bank is controlled by the Israeli military, though the territory where the majority of Palestinians live is controlled by the Palestinian Authority. These Palestinians don't recognize the state of Israel. They are not its citizens. Thus, they don't have the same legal rights as citizens. It's a common worldwide practice. Specifically, it's also a matter of national security measures when certain limitations, like the freedom to move, are applied to the side that constantly attacks you. This practice is authorized by international law. Talking about the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, from 1948 to 1967 Gaza was occupied by Egypt, though wasn't formally annexed. During the same period, West Bank was annexed by Jordan. None of the Arab brothers proclaimed an independent Palestine. Where was free Palestine from Egypt and Jordan? While we're here, well, there is no free Palestine from Jordan based on the ancient Palestinians region of the Roman and Byzantine eras. Some researchers argue that the two-state solution has already been implemented because Jordan, which makes up 78% of the former mandatory Palestine, was originally created as a state for the Arabs. It's a key point. Saying free Palestine, majority of people in the Muslim world, doesn't mean 2 independent states. They see one state of Palestine with no Jews there. For those who hasn't understood yet, free Palestine is a modern political euphemism. Free Palestine doesn't mean 2 states, it means Israel annihilation. Besides Free Palestine banners, I like social reposts that make fun of Israel's recent establishment as if they debunk Israel's right to exist. There should be somebody to tell them when many Arabic countries established their independence. Iraq and Saudi Arabia 1932, Lebanon 1943, Jordan and Syria 1946, Libya 1951, Tunisia 1956, and Morocco 1956, Kuwait 1961, North Yemen and Algeria 1962, South Yemen 1967, Qatar and Bahrain 1971. Congratulations, your grandma is older than all of these Arabic states too. Another popular post is the one like this. I understand how this picture affects the emotions of the viewers, but there never have been such a state as Palestine in history. If we take out all the different empires' years, we have only 3 independent states here. All of them are Jewish. This picture of 4 maps is very popular on the internet, though very inaccurate and misleading. It's used by individuals, giant media players, and officials in high positions like Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, who holds a placard and shows maps of historical Palestine. The first picture manipulates viewers because there was no such state as Palestine. The green area doesn't belong to Palestine. There was a British mandate for Palestine in 1946. The white spot is where Jewish settlements were. The green area does not represent Palestinian settlements. It was made by subtracting white areas from the entire territory. The overwhelming majority of green is an inhabited desert. There were no people at all. The second map is a plan that the Palestinian leadership rejected. It was never implemented. The third map incorrectly labels Gaza and the West Bank as Palestine. These lands were occupied by Egypt and Jordan. There was no Palestine there. The fourth map doesn't differentiate between territories controlled by the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. Talking about the maps in the 20th century, I advise you to use a more accurate one from a Reddit user. We often hear about Palestinian refugees and Nakba, 700,000 in 1948. But did we know that between 250,000 to 300,000 Palestinians fled before Israel announced its independence and before Arab League entered troops into Israel? They were told that the war would end quickly with a complete Jewish defeat, so they could return soon.
I'm just giving you my grandfather's story. My grandfather got an order to evacuate and get out of his village. Not by the Jews, by the Arab leaders from Syria and Lebanon. The majority of the Arabs who left the land of Israel were getting the orders to leave the land by Arab leaders, whether it's from Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, or Egypt. My grandfather rejected this request or demand back then. And he stayed and he said, I'm staying in my land. And when the IDF came, no one took his land. I'm speaking specifically about my grandfather. He stayed there, and that's exactly how I become who I am today, which is an Arab Israeli. And you know what? I'm very glad about that.
Palestinians have their Nakba, but where is Jewish Nakba? The New York Times, May 1948. Jews in grave danger in all Muslim lands. According to different estimations, from 800,000 up to 1 million Jews were forced to leave their homes in the Arab world between the Second World War and the early 1970s. There are now barely 10,000 Jews in North Africa and the entire Middle East outside Israel. Just take a look at these figures. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were pushed out of Arabic countries. Nobody except the Jews speaks about the Jewish Nakba. Jewish refugees left $150 billion in property in Arab countries. These were the milestones of Israel-Palestine conflict, along with some comments. Now let's slice a little bit more context here. In the media, Israel could be shown as a cause of aggression and violence in the region. Over the last 100 years, Israelis killed up to 100,000 Arabs/Palestinians. Between the establishment of independence and today, up to 6.5 million Arabs have been killed by fellow Arabs in Arab countries. Does it permit Israel to kill Palestinians? No, Israelis have a right to self-defense. This fact doesn't permit the media to brainwash that Israel is the main source of violence. Is there anybody here who knows that in the last 14 years in Nigeria, 52,000 people have been killed for being Christians? 8,000 Christian churches and 200 Christian schools were burned. 8 million people were forced to flee their homes to avoid being hacked to death by jihadists. Where is the Christian Nigerian Agba? It seems like nobody should be bothered if the victim is a Christian and the murderer is a Muslim. For context only, the United States provided more than $5.2 billion for humanitarian help since 1994. From 2014 to 2020, UN agencies spent nearly $4.5 billion in Gaza. In total, Palestinians were granted over $40 billion between 1994 and 2020. Can you imagine how many schools, hospitals, residential apartments, and pieces of infrastructure could be built with this money? Bassem, Palestinian human rights activist, said, "It is Hamas that steals the imported cement meant to build houses for you and uses it instead to build a massive network of tunnels from which it hopes to terrorize Israelis. It is Hamas that makes sure humanitarian aid meant for you is diverted to its favored elites who then sell it for a profit on the black market. And it is Hamas that uses you as human shields, stationing rocket launchers and missile arsenals in your apartments, office buildings, schools, and even hospitals. As far as we know, there is no free Palestine from Hamas." For context only, FAFO Foundation, a Norwegian research foundation, conducted a poll among Palestinians in 2005. One of the questions was if you accept military operations against Israeli targets as a legitimate response. 69% accepted that. 69%. Another question was if you support al-Qaeda operations in 3 given areas. 65% of respondents supported bombing in the US and Europe. The authors of the report mentioned the study, conducted by the Center for Strategic Studies, University of Jordan in 2005. 7% of the Palestinians viewed al-Qaeda as a terrorist organization and 70% saw them as a resistance movement. I understand that point of view depends on the viewing angle. Just one most recent example. After the public found out that the hospital in Gaza Strip was hit by Islam Jihad rocket, the Arabic world continued to listen to Arab media that it was done by Israelis.
This is something is quite unbelievable to see even how Al Jazeera and other Arab media outlets are working. You know what they're doing to the Arab world? They are brainwashing. And for those who don't know, I'm an Arab Israeli. So my mother tongue language is Arabic. So I follow the media in Arabic. I follow the social media in Arabic. And what they're saying there is unbelievable. They're completely lying about absolutely everything. They said that Israel bombed the hospital. Until today, they haven't issued any correction. Nobody said anything about the fact that it was the Islamic Jihad who did that. Nobody said about the fact that Israel did not bomb a church in Gaza, because until now, the Arab world thinks that Israel bombed a church in Gaza. And nobody knows even why Hamas is hitting cache weapons under a mosque, and we have the proof for it.
For context only, if the ambitions and possibilities of politicians, or if you want the will of Allah, had been a little different, then we could have here a part of Egypt, Syria, Jordan, or Saudi Arabia, but not Palestine. Due to religious, cultural, historical, and familial ties, it could be done easily. You can check statements from different officials and politicians like Fathi Hamad, Hamas minister in 2012, that half of Palestinians are Egyptians and the other half are Saudis. Farouk Kaddoumi, a senior Palestine Liberation Organization official, in his interview with Newsweek in 1977, Jordanians and Palestinians are considered by the Palestine Liberation Organization as one people. Duher Maassen, member of the Executive Committee of Palestine Liberation Organization, gave an interview in 1977 to the Dutch newspaper True. For tactical reasons, Jordan, which is a state with defined borders, cannot lay claim to Haifa and Jaffa. But as a Palestinian, I can certainly claim Haifa, Jaffa, Beersheba, and Jerusalem. However, the moment we regain our rights to all of Palestine, we will not hesitate a moment to unite Palestine with Jordan. The existence of a separate Palestinian identity serves only tactical purposes. The founding of a Palestinian state is a new tool in the continuing battle against Israel. Hafez al-Assad, president of Syria, made a statement during a meeting with Yasser Arafat in 1967. There is no such thing as a Palestinian people. There is no Palestinian entity. There is only Syria. Israel is in an extremely difficult situation. How can you negotiate a solution if the other side doesn't want to negotiate? How can you combat your enemy if he launches the rockets from schools, hospitals, and civilians' apartments? How can you seek a peaceful solution with the terrorist party that is supported by the majority of people? How can we plan negotiations if the upcoming Palestinian generation is looking at cartoons that show how it is cool to kill a Jew? How can peace be achieved if one side teaches their children to kill the Jews, popularize the materials that glorify terrorism, and encourages martyrdom in the schools? The irony is that these schools are on donations from America and Europe for the sake of peace.
Palestinian sixth graders, grammar exercise, requires them to add the correct verb to the sentences. The jihad warriors fought in defense of their homeland, and the believers rushed to respond the call to jihad. Seventh grade physics problem, Newton's second law. During the first Palestinian uprising, Palestinian youths used slingshots to confront the soldiers of the Zionist occupation. What is the relationship between the elongation of slingshots, rubber, and the tensile strength affecting it? Using it for science.
Israel is dealing with Hamas. You can support or criticize Israel's military response that reaches civilians. Meanwhile, Hamas official says in public that protecting Gaza civilians is not responsibility of Hamas. Please note that people are discussing details with very emotional pictures. Sometimes it's beyond the incredible. For example, we are drowning in the debate over whether the 40 murdered children were beheaded or not. We are not arguing about the death of 40 children, but about whether they were beheaded or not. Unless the conflict is resolved, we will have this debate again and again. Jews and Palestinians, in a modern understanding, are very close to each other. DNA tests show they share common genetic roots. Both Jews and Palestinian Arabs have lived here for centuries. Both have holy places in Jerusalem. The option to live all together in one state doesn't work. There are 2 million Arabs in Israel with Israeli citizenship and 0 Jews under Palestinian governance. Here we see on which side it doesn't work. Two-state solution proposals are repeatedly rejected by the Palestinian side. Horrible historical mapping doesn't help in signing an agreement. Borders of many countries worldwide are subjective compromises. Most states have less than they wanted, but for a compromise, both sides must desire it. Based on the history of the conflict, it's reasonable to assume that if Palestinians discard all their weapons and start to work under a two-state solution with mutual compromises, there will be 2 independent states. If Israel throws away all its weapons and turns off the Iron Dome, it will be destroyed. Unfortunately for Israelis and Palestinians, the conflict has a higher level of interest, where Palestinians are used as a tool. For them, the Israel-Palestine conflict is not about the local borders. You see different protests in different countries. The only thing that's the same is Allah Akbar, Europe or North America, even Australia. You might think that Allah Akbar was translated as Free Palestine, but no, Allah Akbar is a very powerful tool. The distance between Israel and Yemen is almost 1,000 miles, but Allah Akbar doesn't have borders. It's the slogan on the flag of the Houthis, an Islamist political and armed organization in Yemen. Allah is the greatest. Death to America. Death to Israel. I don't care who you believe in, and my faith is none of your business. America and Europe understand that, but there are difficulties with it in Arab countries. Speaking about the US and EU, people should care about not giving citizenship to people who hate their country.
Wait, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Hamas is not a terrorist group.
Oh, it isn't, ma'am.
First of all, Hamas is not a terrorist group. Hamas is not a terrorist group.
So what happened last week?
What happened last week is that you need to fucking educate yourself. My name is Esther Qur'an.
Okay.
Okay, I'm 22 years old. I'm a Palestinian. I have no fucking problem saying I support Hamas because they are the true fighters of Palestine and they're gonna bring back Palestine because you guys are fucking white supremacist idiots that need to wake the fuck up. Esther Qur'an, pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas. Alhamdulillah, free Palestine from the river to the sea. I hope they all fucking burn in hell.
So no America first for you?
No.
Are you an American?
Yes.
And you don't want to put America first?
No.
If you enjoyed this video, I'd love your support. Simply click the like and subscribe buttons. Your thoughts are valuable to me, so please share them in the comments section below. Press to watch my previous video What's Going On in the US, and I'll see you there.